Hi, welcome back to Harlem Stories. My name is Adam Feinberg, and today I've got Mark Becker as a guest host.
Hey, Adam.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here with you.
All right. So Mark has been on a couple episodes, so we're going to just skip into our storyline today. Today we're going to talk about Graham Court. And, if you ever walked past 16th Street, see this huge, tower of a building, on 116th and Adam Clayton Powell, you'll notice that there's this building that looks kind of familiar. And you're scratching your head, why does this look so familiar? And you might think about it and you know what? This reminds me of the Apthorp or the Belnord on the Upper West Side. The Apthorp being on 79th and Broadway. The Belnord is on 86th between Broadway and Amsterdam. We were talking in our previous episode of the value of between Broadway and Amsterdam. Certainly, this is one of those inner Courtyard buildings we're talking about. And for anybody that isn't already aware, the Belnord has been in pop culture quite a bit recently. So anybody that's watched that show, Only Murderers in the Buildings on Hulu, the Belnord is featured prominently in the show and actually is almost the equivalent of a character in the show.
Wow.
So we'll talk more about this and the Astor family, themselves. And you really can't talk about old New York without talking into, just a handful of influential, wealthy families. Today, the focus will be on the Astors, and we're drilling down into one specific building, Graham Court. But a lot of people don't necessarily know the Astors, but they kind of do. And, for instance, Mark, what might people tie into the Astor?
Well, there are a number of, Astor Place, which is kind of the equivalent of, 8th Street down by the NYU campus
and
there.
Cooper Union, of course, yeah.
Yeah, Cooper. I don't know if you could tell me if there's a tie-in. I honestly don't know. Astoria, Queens, I don't know.
There is, and Astoria, Oregon as well.
Yeah, so the Astors are they're all over the place, and I guess they showed up at the right time when New York City was really becoming a prominent place on the map. Yeah,
John Astor, the family patriarch, he was actually originally, and there's some real interesting factoids here. We get into his background. He originally made quite a significant amount of money in fur trading, and he was absolutely legitimate in that. Until then, he decided to branch out into other fields and actually became New York's first infamous drug dealer. Huh. and became known as because he was selling opium to China and the Chinese, and made a significant amount of money, and decided at some point that he wanted to get out of the illicit trade and go legit again, and that's when he started investing and started buying up Manhattan real estate and Manhattan property. Ultimately, on his deathbed, one of the things that he said, he's like, if I could do it all over again, he's like, I'd just continue to buy more New York real estate.
Wow.
So this should be the mantra of basically every New York City real estate agent. And this was back in the mid 1840s.
Well, that's one of the things that I was telling clients throughout the whole COVID thing, is it's like New York City's been around for 400 years. You really expect this place to go away because of some people got to leave the city for a little while for COVID or whatever. So it really speaks to the lasting nature of New York.
And I think the next time we have some sort of scare, the reality is it took us less than a year to have the vaccine,
sure,
an effective vaccine. So, the next time we wind up going through this, and I think, with climate change and all, it wouldn't be surprising if we do go through these kind of events again. The reality is, we'll find a way through it. We will come back. We endure tough times. In any case, though, this is really the mantra of New York. Is New York is always a good investment. So even in times where maybe it's not necessarily optimal or perceived as optimal, it will come back.
Right.
And John Astor, really hit the nail on the head, and he really knew what he was doing. His family ultimately became heavy involved in real estate, as well. And, the family benefited in such massive ways. Now, the other way that the public winds up knowing the Astor family name, anybody that's seen the movie Titanic, John Jacob Astor and his wife unfortunately perished in the sinking of the Titanic. And if you've seen the movie, you've seen that they, went down together, and which actually wasn't the way it actually happened in real life. But in any case, the reality came down to is that the Astor family is well known throughout history, throughout pop culture, and also the Waldorf Astoria ties back to the same family as well. And we'll get a little bit more into that as in trivia as well, because I think there's some really interesting stories there. But most important, in this is that ultimately John Jacob Astor, who did drown in the Titanic, his body was recovered, and he now permanently rests in Trinity Cemetery, which is in the northern portion of Hamilton Heights, right on the Washington Heights border. So it really kind of ties back to the historical nature of old New York. And his relatives, John Jacob Astor's relatives, also include the Schemmerhorns, and anybody that's watched the movie Gangs of New York would have heard of them.
There's a street in Brooklyn.
And of course, there's the street in Brooklyn.
I used to live right by there. In fact, they've seen a lot of development over the last decade.
Yeah, exactly. So these old New York families, they kind of knew what they were doing before they realized what trendsetters that they were going to eventually become. And then you look into further family connections, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and other prominent early families in the U.S. So William Waldorf Astor, and I always say this Astoria, William Waldorf Astor, it was John Jacob Astor's cousin, and they were rivals for a long time, and they both ran their own hotels, and eventually they joined forces at some point, buried the hatchet, and they built the Waldorf Astoria Hotel.
Wow.
Now, they were actually connected via a footbridge. They were across the street from each other. And they ultimately wound up needing to move. And when they sold the property, ironically, there is now an iconic building of the New York City skyline that's rested there for a long time, not one of the new skyscrapers, but ultimately the original location of the Waldorf Astoria is now in the place where the Empire State Building now sits. So, again, this is all awesome old New York trivia, but, pretty cool in that aspect. Going back to a little bit some more of the development aspects of this, on the Upper West Side in 1904, there was a lot of development being fueled, and even as you go further north as well, because of the expansion of the New York City subway lines. And as a result, it created this speculative boom that ultimately that was going to stretch into a very long time and created some absolutely spectacular properties. A lot of wealthy Manhattanites, they loved the elegancy of the single-family townhomes, and they weren't exactly being lured, by the idea of apartment living. So in order to be persuaded to live on top of one another, they had to have something special. They wanted, beautiful entrances, spacious rooms, lots of light and air, and yards that served as gardens. And Astors came up with this, beautiful solution, an introverted palazzo. And the center of the building was hollowed out and created this large courtyard surrounded by perimeter walls. This garden created a tremendous amount of light and air to all the apartments, along with this European ambiance. And that was something that was just really highly valued in the early 20th century. But not only that, it created this social setting for being seen and for seeing and being seen. And had the additional added effect of being a bit intimidating to those that weren't inside the walls. So, the first one of these interior courtyard buildings built by the Astors was Graham Court in Harlem. and that was built by William Waldorf Astor. And Graham Court, it still exists today. So if you're walking along 116th Street in Adam Clayton Powell, you'll see this very familiar looking building. And if you peek in through the gates, as you're going north on Adam Clayton from 116th, mid-block between 116 and 117, is this grand gates, followed by this, I forgot what they call those kind of tiling, but it's like this interlocked diagonal tiling, Gustavino tiles, I think is what they call it. And the Gustavino tiles are basically what you're going to see in a lot of these higher end. You might see them in churches or
kind of a herringbone pattern.
Kind of a herringbone pattern, exactly.
Sure.
And it was called Gustavino tiling. And you saw this beautiful, beautiful entryway over there. And that kind of brought you into the center setting of it. Now, Graham Court was the first of these interior courtyard buildings built, and Graham Court was absolutely spectacular at the time. And ultimately, it was the predecessor to what now most people know as the Apthorp, which is between 78th and 79th and Broadway, and takes up the entire block between Broadway and West End, between 78th and 79th. And it's beautiful, and I think if you try and count the number of celebrities that have lived in the Apthorp over the years, I think you'd start losing count pretty quick.
Yeah.
Because it's been the inspiration for plenty of actors and writers, over the years. But just all walks of life, and many people have been very successful that have lived in there. And today, it has the luxury pricing to reflect that, of course. But also the Belnord, and I had mentioned Belnord, which is at 86 between Broadway and Amsterdam. And again, it's one of these block long buildings, interior courtyard. Currently featured in Only Murderers in the Buildings, and absolutely, just as beautiful. I know that converted to condos. Is
that a good show, by the way?
I'm sorry?
Is that a good show?
I've enjoyed the show. It's
Selena Gomez and
Steve Martin.
Sure.
It was, I figured, I'm like, what? These guys are, seemingly they haven't really been doing much for many years, but man, they have not lost their edge at all. They are absolutely hysterical, but the show is actually entertaining as well. I really enjoyed the show. I might be a little biased because I love these buildings and all that, but honestly, I did think, I had a really great time watching the show. My mom was kind of surprised when I introduced it to her, and she's like, when's the next season coming? So obviously she enjoyed it as well. In any case, Graham Court, it was opened in 1901. It was designed as this Italian Renaissance palazzo by architects Clinton and Russell. 93 apartments, but that is actually under dispute because I've seen it published as also 100 apartments. I'm wondering if there have been combinations, from the original design. Takes up the full length of 7th Avenue from 116th to 117th. Only 8 stories, but it does create kind of this imposing kind of feel. Limestone facade, and that, again, goes back to that kind of imposing, almost like tower-like. If you look at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, it's also that limestone, big, heavy brick type of design. That Gustavino arch tile design that I mentioned as well. So all this, very, very high-end feeling, luxury.
Kind of makes you wonder how they physically were able to do that with those huge bricks. It's almost like the pyramids in Egypt. Like, how did they pull that off?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. But obviously they did it, and they did it to perfection. Building is still standing today, despite what happened over the years. And as New York City declined in the late 50s, 60s, 70s, this became kind of rough. The building became kind of rough. It was originally stated to be 800 rooms, disputed number of apartments, but apartments were huge, 6 to 11 rooms with servants' quarters. Every apartment had a fireplace. Some had as many as 4 fireplaces.
That's amazing.
So, I mean, this was at one point, because of how New York had become ravaged, it at one point almost became an HDFC.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
I've always wondered this. If you have a fireplace in New York City, does the smoke have to travel through the fireplaces of the floors above you? How does that work?
I don't know the technicals of it, but I do know that for the most part, most New Yorkers have wound up closing their fireplaces because of the flu. So I'm guessing there is some sort of component to that. To what degree that I'm not quite sure. And how that is engineered, but not only maintaining that flue was expensive, but I know that there were a lot of compliance things, which is why you don't see very many buildings with active fireplaces anymore, or they've been converted to gas, and
that's useless.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, that kind of defines.
I could just stand in my oven and light the pilot. I just stand there and watch the gas. I mean, that's not very interesting. To have a gas fireplace. I mean, no offense if you're working with clients who are looking for a gas fireplace.
Right. Some might just want it more as a styling design, to fill center of the living room. But
it's visually nice to look at fire.
Yeah,
it's calming.
But not the same as a wood burning fireplace.
No, definitely
not. I get it. And in townhouses, you might see the possibility of that more often than condos and co-ops.
Yeah.
Every once in a blue moon, I might come across that. So, it gives you an idea just of how high-end luxury this building really was, and time had ravaged it over the years. It's been captured in a few different movies. The most prominent of which, it became the Carter Apartments in New Jack City, which not exactly the best look for the building, but it was the realistic setting for it. Which basically became a crack den and headquarters for Crack Central. But in later movies, it wound up being used in Jungle Fever and the movie Sugar Hill with Wesley Snipes. Now, ironically, Sugar Hill is probably about 30 blocks north of there and a few blocks to the west. But Sugar Hill, used the building as part of, its filming.
Mm-hmm.
And in this, I mentioned in the 1960s and 70s, it was pretty run down. It was landmarked in '84. And at one point, the tenants took control and on track to converting the building into an income-restricted co-op, which are known as HDFCs. We're actually going to have an entire episode on HDFCs coming up that I've written that we haven't recorded yet. But the Astor families, as I mentioned over here, actually I should just finish that last thought before going back to the Astor family. It's remained a rental building over the years, and apartments are today very well coveted, despite the fact that the building isn't in as great condition as people would like to see it restored back to its original grandeur. But it's definitely desirable. Units don't come up in there very often, and when they do, it's kind of like you almost need to know somebody to get in.
Yeah.
But I can say it's definitely these interior courtyard buildings are definitely regarded as New York's most stylish courtyard, and I think that's all I really have in terms of the Graham Court. But as far as the Apthorp and the Belnord, the Apthorp, you've had celebrities, and I mentioned I can't even begin to list all of them, but just as a sampling, Al Pacino, Conan O'Brien.
Hey.
I'm not even going to try and do a Pacino imitation. Rosie O'Donnell, and those are just a few. The woman that wrote You've Got Mail, and the one where they meet at the Empire State Building, I forgot the name of that one. A little further north, and there's the other one, the Belnord, and I've already mentioned a couple times, its current celebrity status in pop culture. But yeah, these are absolutely spectacular.
It's kind of reminiscent, some of these buildings, Belnord, these other ones, Apthorp. It almost looks kind of British to me. It's got sort of a Buckingham Palace kind of feel where you can just sort of drive into that initial little courtyard there. I wonder if...
Well, William actually has a British background and grew up in the London area.
Yeah.
So it definitely makes sense that he tried to bring at least some of that kind of London British, feel to New York, and ultimately, he rests permanently in London, while the rest of the family resides in Hamilton Heights in the cemetery. So, yeah, it makes sense that when you say that, but yeah, it definitely has that kind of fortress almost type of feel to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Grand Court, very interesting building along 116th Street, only a handful of blocks from Central Park. Great location. Maybe one day it will wind up converting.
Well, thanks for all the information, Adam. I certainly learned a lot. And I'm glad you took the lead on this one, because I've been to all these buildings, but I certainly had no idea of the history. And the Astors were certainly a huge impact on New York City. Anyone who's a New York City history geek should learn about the Astors and their influence.
Yeah, and just the continuing nature of all of their connections, the Astors, the Schemmerhorns, the Roosevelts, and I'm sure the list goes on, with all the people that they were close with.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for sharing your time with me,
Thank you.
And we hope our listeners appreciate it as well. Thank you for joining us with Harlem Stories, and stay tuned for other further interesting episodes.
All the best.